Again, I'd like to thank Neil Leach and Roland, who's not here today, as well as the Dean for really organizing this pretty amazing event and getting all of you guys here. For those of you who have traveled, I'd like to thank you as well. I'd also like to thank Neil and Roland for giving me the privilege of introducing Patrick Schumacher. I'm going to go through a few accolades and then hopefully say something a little bit more important. Patrick is, I think, the only partner really with Zaha Hadid at Zaha Hadid Architects. He's the author of, well, I would say almost countless papers and lectures and an upcoming book, which I think he will be talking about. More personal to me and to many people, he was really the founder and one of the directors and continues to be one of the directors of the AADRL in London, which has proven to be, I think, a significant program in the world. He's also a professor at Innsbruck University and a visiting professor at the Angewandte in Vienna. I think most importantly, I was trying to think about how do you introduce Patrick Schumacher, and being in academia, I think it's a question of how do you judge somebody's relevance in some ways, and the way that I think I would judge Patrick's relevance is not only on the numerous buildings that are now built and the numerous competition wins that are elegant and incredible, but also on the generation of people that he's influenced as an educator and a thinker and a theorist. And sort of lastly, as an anecdote, I was in China last month with a number of people here in the room, and I think in one conference on parametric practices in Xi'an, there was something like 25 people that were all there as practitioners and observers that were all at one point in time a student of Patrick Schumacher's. And I think that's probably the greatest accolade and introduction I can give. So please welcome Patrick Schumacher.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, David, for the generous introduction, and thanks, Neil, for inviting me. This will be a fast-track lecture. I will argue that instead of talking about parametric techniques, we can be and should be talking and promoting a new style, which I've termed parametricism, which is of the same magnitude, profundity, and importance, I think, as modernism was, transforming the face of this planet in the first half of the 20th century. I think what we're forging here and what we're working on has this degree of interest and importance, and I perceive it in places like this, but places also in China, in India, and of course in London, and in many other schools of architecture and young architects, that everybody wants to participate in this new paradigm of new way of working, new values, new ideas, new concepts. And I'm trying to define those and bring this discourse very close to architecture and urban design, not to be conflated so much with urban planning and the politics of urbanization. I think there we need to draw a distinction and what we can and understand what the discipline of architecture can contribute in a kind of overall process of civilization, but it cannot substitute itself for the politics and politics of urbanization. So we're staying with urban design but we have to reflect, of course, the societal conditions in which this is taking place, and this will be one of the aspects that we'll be talking about. But before I'm going into parametricism, and giving an operational definition of it and showing the principles which drive it, I want to invite you to join the opening of a building, which has been a long time in the making, for over 10 years. The Rome Museum, National Italian Museum of Contemporary Art and Architecture, called MAXI, which was opening very, very recently, and I brought some images. It is still relevant. It brings us back right into the domain of architecture, and I think as architects we appreciate this work, but it also speaks to and is embedded within the definition of parametricism, even though its generation and design process was not dependent on kind of more sophisticated parametric techniques we're now kind of investing ourselves in, But I will show you a few hints and glimpses that the project participates in that overall paradigm shift we're now observing and promoting. So this is, I'm going to click through that quite quickly, with here and there maybe make a few comments on this project, just the way it sits as an extension of a kind of field, the way it kind of resonates perhaps with the river, a kind of sense of embedding. It's not an object, it creates a kind of field and participates in a field. It draws in urban directionalities, which are multiple, and mediates them into this kind of field condition. This was the original design. You can see that there is elements missing, which an existing building embedded here. As I said, urban directions taken up, mediated, 2 urban grids, and what also it kind of embeds another project and extends as a non-object kind of field condition. Yep. And it's been a kind of true to intention executed as a field out of line elements. The initial concept was to take the essential functional component of a museum, which is the gallery display wall, as a constituting element, and irrigate that field with walls, set these up into a condition of parallel move, and having through the intersection of these walls setting up interior and exterior spaces, and then kind of proliferated elements through ribs and trusses to create that kind of formal universe which delivers this institutional building. I'm just clicking through how this kind of appears as you go closer, as you move closer. There's a certain degree of monumentality and simplicity in some of the space, and picks up a lot of energy and complexity at certain key moments, singularities, let's say, in the field. And I think there's an interest in the kind of layered depth of and staggering of spatial connections and deep visual penetration, and certain moments of kind of intensification of these kind of lines, the way they diverge and funnel. And I think it was also quite nice to see this building occupied, the kind of streams of people, all in black, all architects at that point, harmonizing with the kind of aesthetic and really accentuating some of the kind of lines and showing that the multi-leveledness, the kind of layered of the space in all directions, above, below, and all around, in this kind of deep three-dimensional field space. So you see, when they're empty, they're not quite the same, as if you kind of have the moving crowds participating and watching each other. It's a kind of space of depth, visual depth, and simultaneity of communication. And then it kind of moves into very, very serene and simple art spaces, gallery spaces, which are nearly kind of neutral. And this is the kind of diagram of these kind of field of lines, kind of irrigating that space and setting up a kind of spatial logic, and that's the way it kind of translates in the real building. And you see the kind of people on different levels. There's actually a cut through here, a glass floor, all the way to the top beam, which kind of swings around, and there's a lot of these kind of deep vistas. Here's a kind of cut all the way to the top level. This is a kind of second singularity or hub of communication in the building, inside the gallery domain, and there's one on the outside, in the kind of public domain, if you like. And then it kind of calms down and quiets down and creates this kind of endless flow. And it's a space which always continues. There's no beginning, no end, no center. That's this kind of notion of a field where you don't have an object. It remains amorph. You're just kind of navigating field qualities, if you like. And these are those moments of kind of depth where you look out and look back at the building and the different elements intersecting, and you can kind of anticipate where you might be moving. And this is another one of those kind of complex moments where you see the different elements. You move out of the building to look back through outer space, back into it, etc. There's a lot of these intricacies of spatial complexity, all based on this rigorous a priori set formalism of these linear elements which follow certain rules. These are kind of adhered to by, not through a script, but through kind of giving yourself a kind of design rules to follow. These are some of the steps of the terraced kind of gallery, which again you reel to the outside. There's a lot of I think, intricacy. And now moving up to this space up here. The glass floor was talking about cutting through, looking back over the field and the final kind of moment on the outside. Okay, so just to share that. And that there is importance to distinguish techniques and values and descriptions of the results where you're driving the work. In terms of parametricism, it's a global movement, I think. Once I formulate the principles, they're all kind of, there's nothing new. You recognize them that they're absolutely adhere to and become to dominate a whole generation of architects. But I'm showing work only of where I'm involved in. I have access to this work, Studied Architects, the A Design Research Lab, the Vienna University of Applied Arts, and the Innsbruck Institute of Experimental Architecture. These are kind of arenas where I'm involved and I'm gathering the work to present, but the implications of this are obviously wider, and a lot of people here in the room are, I think, participating in that, in the formation of that style. And in fact, to a certain extent, I would say it's a retrospect claim of interpretive authority that there is such a style has been forming over the last 15 years. And so it's a retrospect, also kind of reckoning with what has been going on. And it came to me that this is the moment to formulate this position when we had 10 years of DEL retrospective, and the realization that what we're working on now, the kind of problems we set ourselves, the ambitions we pursue are absolutely identical to the problems and ambitions we set ourselves over 10 years before that. Just we had home in at it more deeper. We had built up the repetitive techniques to pursue these with more rigor and with more virtuosity, with more domains of application, but the kind of principal ambitions and remain stable, and that means a lot, given the fact that, for instance, modernism, the whole of the 1920s, the whole decade, kind of forged something which was absolutely mature at that point in the late 20s. And I think there is a mature style has been forged. The principles are clear, and I will explicate them now. Just a reminder that the Digital Cities magazine is the trigger here, and that some of this can be followed up in the article, some of the arguments I'm making, and that we're talking about a new global style for architecture and urban design. And the lecture, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to go through all these points. I'm going to start with the definition and principles of parametricism. Then I will talk about that relationship between style and techniques, which is a general relationship you'll find in the history of architecture. Then we have to go into the historical significance of parametricism within the history of architecture, but also broader within the history of this civilization we're kind of participating in, and to, in a sense, make sense of what's going on, say why it's important, say why it is not, this economic crisis means very little, maybe a small delay, but doesn't prove that this is kind of irresponsible extravagances we're working with, but there is a historical profound significance to the kind of work we're pursuing. Then I will just fly through a lot of images documenting the work of Studied Architects within that paradigm. Then I'm trying to, let's say, escalate parametricism the way I see it. 5 agendas I've been personally pushing and pursuing, and some suggestions for where this work could go and develop. Most of this in the academic arenas of research. And finally, I most will not be able to get to that. I've been recently looked at the kind of, let's say, we're having a maturing style. I show a lot of work which is adhering to it, and I now want to look back and look at the overall history of architecture and see at its absolute high points, Gothic cathedral, Baroque, churches and see where we are standing with respect to the intricacy level of organization, order, and how we compete. Let's say if we would face up to a challenge like this with the buildings we're doing now, particularly in Rome, this kind of reflection is triggered when we launch a kind of major public building in a city like this. Okay, so the definition of parametricism is not a linguistic definition, it's an operational definition in terms of the do's and don'ts. And I will give this the essential definition of innovation just first on the linguistic level. It means simply that all the elements of architecture have become parametrically malleable. I mean, that's kind of the simple statement. That's why we're saying, I use this phrase parametricism to name what's going on. And we will see that this is what sets it apart from all prior. That's enough to set up what we're doing now apart from all prior architecture of the last 500 years, or if you go with 2,000 years. And the striking advantage of this is simply, and that's what it's all about, I think, the intensification of relations, both internal within a building and a construct, and of that building within the kind of urban systems. Both internal and external intensification of relations. This is what is achieved and can be achieved if we make and assume all architectural elements to be parametrically malleable, and therefore, of course, moving into correlations, associative logic, etc. So, if you just bring that kind of ontological shift to a point, and I'm saying ontological shift is really the most primary, basic primitives which constitute architecture. What we work with is so radically different. And this image comes straight from Le Corbusier's Vers une architecture, where he is describing what architecture constitutes architecture is simply these Platonic figures, ideal, rigid, hermetic, geometric figures. That is Rome, but it is also all of modernism is still constituted out of these elements. And that's how you compose. You just repeat these, you place them into some kind of composition, and that's the game of architecture. And what we're now obviously looking at is something radically different. And when Greg first wrote this article on blobs, you can feel the kind of profundity. There's a piece of software is bringing into the domain of architecture, and it gets this kind of ontological weight. Everything changes, everything transforms. That is a 95, but we actually already, in terms of parametricist urbanism, if you like, this is a studio project, 93, I've been teaching with Zaha Hadid at Columbia University, where we have been thinking in terms of layering systems and subsystems, and Tschumi made this kind of Urknall of the superposition clear with the La Villette, and the next step was in a sense that these are not just indifferent to each other and crashing into each other, but that they start to inflect each other and work and pick up each other's geometry, logic, and start to kind of weave into each other a different system. And this was a collaborative studio where each student would take up one urban layer, and then there was a collective process of laying it down, sequencing, and letting one layer kind of weave and inflect and mold itself onto the other. And this is a kind of these are the kind of two, let's say, starting points, I would say, around 93, 95, of what we're now kind of calling parametricism. And the new primitives, obviously, instead of a line, is a spline, something fundamentally different, blobs, NURBS, particles, and scripts as a new way, a new kind of primitive to think through architecture. That is obviously very, very fundamental, but it's more than techniques, because Fosters and lots of late modernists and use parametric techniques, and that doesn't participate. We can learn from that, but it's not pushing, following the same values and pursuits we're promoting, and is in a sense doing modernist projects with new techniques. Or you could also imagine postmodernists or even neoclassicists using using parametric techniques or computational techniques and develop shape grammars of classical facades, etc. So it's very important to say that we have that we understand what we're doing as a style, and of course we need to also understand the concept of style is not something superficial about being stylistic and interested only in surface effects, but it is something much more profound which transforms the phenomenology, yes, but also the organizational structure of architectures and urban configurations. It's the great new style after modernism, I'm claiming that. And it is important to claim this concept of style. I mean, architectural innovation / history proceeds via the succession of styles. That's the mode in which architecture progresses. And you can parallel with the great kind of paradigms of certain sciences, which move through paradigm shifts, and each time there's a systematic kind of understanding what's going on. So these are the key styles. I call them epochal styles: Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, Neoclassicism, Historicism, Eclecticism, Modernism, Paramatricism. And in between, there's also could be transitional styles between Renaissance and Baroque. There's Mannerism, if you like. They have subsidiary styles. The kind of subsidiary style of the Baroque would be Rococo. There is, of course, transitions between historicism, eclecticism to modernism, like the Art Nouveau, Expressionism. These are very short-lived, at the moment of crisis, kind of steerings and attempts to find things new. And then modernism hits home, clears the market. All this Expressionism, Art Nouveau stuff fades away, and there's 50 years of hardcore pursuit into the same kind of direction, the same principles, and that's what we need now, and that's what I feel is forging now. And from modernism to parametricism, we had these kind of transitional episodes like postmodernism and deconstructivism that represent the crisis of modernism, confusion, where to go, what to do, drawing back from history, going all over the place, and bringing in philosophy. I think philosophy comes into architecture, these moments of crises and confusion, to kind of rethink where we are, and then it kind of, once a new kind of paradigm was forged, new values were clear, new ways of working, the philosophy kind of withdraws, because we have things to do now, and you know what you're doing, and you want to just go on with it, and that's what the point we have reached. And nobody's, I mean, I'm great to have Manuel here and to guide us further, but the kind of passion to going through Deleuze, the kind of 25th time, has faded away because we know what we're doing. So there's modernism, there's the crisis of modernism, and that is a global phenomenon. That's not internal to architecture. That is the Fordist reproduction paradigm kind of coming to halt, and you can see it with the collapse of the Soviet Union as one example, the big kind of crisis of the 70s and Thatcherism, Reaganism kind of is a huge shift. And that imposes on architecture to kind of transforms itself. You have confusion, you have kind of new things incorporating, and that is kind of, I think now we found our way. That's my interpretation. Parametricism is aligned with and is the kind of way forward in terms of a kind of post-Fordist network society as a new reproduction paradigm. But there's another significance. I think the way we have to understand style, appearances are important, that you can see that things look like, and because all what of architecture is functioning through sentient subjects who have to understand, comprehend, navigate a phenomenological world they move through. So appearances are extremely important. And that's no accident. We identified styles through their appearance. But of course, the appearance means something much more deeper. It appears and looks a certain way because organized in a certain way and structured in a certain way. Well, that's one important, while we shouldn't be afraid of style having connotations of how things look like, and architects are all about, and that's distinguished from engineering. We are not engineers. We are kind of articulate and work on appearance is extremely important. But also another aspect I think is important to realize, that styles have this moment to be kind of design research programs. And what I mean by that is very important, particular avant-garde styles. I think in the 20th century something happened to this one of architecture. It kind of bifurcated, or it created these kind of subsystems of avant-garde and mainstream. Particularly since the 60s has been very, very clear. And so that's why we shouldn't be kind of worried that we're still relatively marginal in what we're doing. There's an avant-garde in which this style becomes hegemonic first. Then it conquers the mainstream. And what is important about styles is that they establish the condition for collective design research. And that's what we're feeling, that you know what everybody wants to work on this stuff because everybody else is already working on this stuff, and you don't want to work on stuff which nobody wants to know about. You want to participate in something. And that's where progress happens. Yeah? If we kind of critically debate primary principles every Monday morning, we're not going to get anywhere, and the old stuff continues. And as Mies already said, you can't invent a new architecture every Monday morning, you know. And he was quite content, and I'm content to work on this and with these kind of principles for the next 25 years. So, but it is about formulating pertinent desires, and we'll come to this, the kind of values, a kind of Kunstwollen, if you like, framing and posing problems we all work on, problems we all want to solve. You know, how to move from single system setups to multiple system setups, and how to kind of integrate generative systems, agent modeling systems with preconceived setups, etc. So there's some problems we're all working on, and of course strategically constraining the solution space. That means when we're facing architectural problems, urban problems, when we're setting a brief and task, we know we're only going to solve it through parametric systems. We're only going to solve it through single surfaces, etc. We're not going to allow ourselves to fall back on discrete objects, on a number of given things. So there's clearly the necessary for any collective research project to go forward is that we are bloody-minded and focused. And it's extremely important to hold on to the new principles of fermenting in the face of difficulty. So a lot of the stuff which been working on seems kind of inept, seems kind of unable to stand up to the real realities. You have to withdraw into the gallery, you do your experiments, you have to disburden yourself. So a lot of this is, then you kind of start to tackle an urban issue, you enter a competition, you lose all of them first. So it's extremely important that you're not disheartened, that you keep homing in, because your intuition is, it is these principles, these a prioris, these kind of things I'm holding on to obstinately, because my intuition is, in the end I will succeed. In the end I will be winning and being hyper-performative and will outperform the modernists, the deconstructivists, the neoclassicists, because I'm more versatile, I'm more intelligent, I can integrate more aspects, etc. So I'm winning out, and we are winning out at the moment, I would say. But this is very important, and you can compare this to the paradigms of science, where when they're first forged and fermented, you know, they're continuously defeated and weak, but you need this kind of methodical tolerance to allow these early and budding research programs to kind of continue in the face of failure, difficulty, ridicule. But I think there's also an important point where I think we've reached, where we also have to gear up. We cannot that kind of zone of tolerance cannot continue forever. I don't think it continue into the second and third decade without being discredited. And I had that intuition early on in the design research lab, where I wanted to challenge these new techniques, ways of working, and formalisms, and bring them hardcore tasks to solve and show their high performance capacity. For instance, with business organizations and corporate headquarters and so on, the kind of high performance aspects of society can be, you deliver that high performance spaces to them with these means. So what are, and the way to define a kind of paradigm or research program is through so-called heuristics, the kinds of issues and paths of research you avoid. You're no longer trying to solve a problem, for instance, in a modernist way or in a kind of classicist way. You just these paths are blocked, and you have an intuition which kind of working hypotheses are the ones you want to pursue, and you just pursue them. These are the heuristics, both negative and positive, what to avoid and what to always set as an a priori method to work tasks through. So, but also, when I started to think about it, I focused foremost on the formal heuristics, and I will show these formal heuristics, but I think there's also functional heuristics, that each style has not only a certain formal repertoires, which you can recognize, but it has also actually a certain way of understanding and handling programs and functions. That is an important reflection, and it must be so, because the distinction of form and function is critical, and form-function relations remain critical at the center of this discipline. If there is a series of paradigm shifts as styles evolve, where everything seems to change, one thing never changes. It is the integration that we are all about, to innovate form-function relationships and give new form to new function. Therefore, we have to think about both functional heuristics and formal heuristics, which in the end define parametricism. And I can also, in the same way, define modernism, define neoclassicism, define the Baroque, define the Renaissance, and the book David is talking about is trying to do that. Here I'm focusing on parametricism. So the formal heuristics, the things which are more in our face and obvious, are very simple, and there's nothing new about this. As I hinted at before, negatively no rigid forms. I mean, who is still drawing a circle, square, rectangle? I mean, everybody here in the front row, their arms would rather fall off than, allow that to happen. So that is the artificiality. You simply don't do it, and you don't even question it anymore. I mean, but it has to be like this. Because if you allow that, then you kind of hybridize and electricize and you cannot test a thesis. The thesis is you can do it without using this. So these are absolutely out. Why? They lack complexity. They lack capacity of relating, and they're the main. So that's the first. The second is no repetition. And we know that. I mean, of course, some allowance is made perhaps in a tessellation, yes, but in an overall kind of composition, to have repetition is absolutely taboo. And it should be so. An interesting thing is that architecture has always worked with these Platonic forms and always relied on repetition from the classical to the modern. And now we're also saying this is kind of the arch image of Fordist modernism, where repetition in the urban, repetition and in the architectural, on every level, to the last tectonic detail. And there's a lack of variety, and that's no longer representing the society. The society can no longer find itself in there. It can no longer structure and organize and articulate society. So that is also out. But also, no pure difference. I mean, this was the big discussion when, difference was drawn in, postmodernism, collage city, and deconstructivism kind of integrating and breaking into each other, different systems which remain in conflict and so on. I mean, that idea of pure difference, we've gone over that. I mean, that was a big kind of achievement of the early 90s with Greg and Jeff and so on, and making that very, very clear. So there is no pure difference, no collage of unrelated elements. But what we're striking out, there's lack of order in this. But what we're striking out here is actually everything which is going on ever since the crisis of modernism, the collapse of modernism. What we're getting now all over the world, all developed model, is this pure difference, is that unrelated cacophony of things placed, and there is no relatedness from one building to the next, from one urban quarter to the next. There is no from one room to the next in these compositions. So it's blinding. It's chaos. It's visual chaos, and there's no rhyme, reason, or navigability and orientability in this. So all of this is going. The ideology of architecture for the last 2,000 years, the reality of the last 30 years, all of this is negated, but we know where we're going. Where we're going is, the big inspiration comes from nature. We have gearing up. Nature was always, in a sense, that dream, that sense what architecture aspires to. It was just differently interpreted. The classic architecture was constructing itself as a representation of nature, understanding itself in terms of proportion and order and kind of cosmic models and so on. Modernism was and Sharon and Hering, but also Frank Lloyd, everybody was kind of relating to nature. But now, I think, comparing to the models of nature delivered by classicism, modernism, we truly, on a totally different new level, with a new understanding of nature, through dynamical systems and a new understanding of material self-organization, we have finally kind of another access to nature, which is delivering exactly what the three crosses kind of were motivated by: complex, variegated order. And these are the kind of emerging inspired. That's what we want these cities, these landscapes, these kind of spaces to be like. There's kind of coherency and there's variation, but following laws and logics in organic, anorganic nature, etc. So, and the only precursor of parametricism is, in fact, Feuerbach, who has been kind of taken as extremely serious. And I was just discussing earlier with Manuel that the kind of institute with all these kind of analog computing and research and then into computing is something which is amazingly dense and deep, and we cannot replicate. None of us here, being isolated with a bunch of students, haphazardly kind of individual efforts cannot replicate, in a sense, what what a kind of research institute with a kind of stable tenure, multiple peoples over a long period of time is able to deliver. And it's still extremely important to go to these research reports. It's a great resource and makes us reflect that architecture doesn't have any research, institutionalized research, except for the exception. So what we are forced to do is to transform teaching institutions into kind of vehicles of research, but with all their limitations, every year new students, or avant-garde firms using their haphazard sequence of projects to forge an oeuvre. And only very, very recently we have in firms kind of very, very small research unit happening. So, but it seems to me that the kind of ambitions we're formulating needs a new institutional recognition in terms of research institutes which don't exist. But what in terms of nature and the kind of learning from nature, of course, it's wonderful what Freud is doing, but we can go much further. I mean, we're applying this, we're winning competitions in different city plans, so there is something happening at Zardid Architects. There's these kind of things being forged and developed at AADRL. Vienna, even Innsbruck, a provincial city, I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. Once you deliver the message, you set out the tools, it's kind of happening, it's coming on. And the wonderful thing for me is that it is, in fact, compared to Freud, we are so much more kind of freed and proliferous, because the nature we are creating is truly second, is truly original creation, artificial life, if you like, where we're not constrained in terms of design by the few physical processes we find. If we create a swarm, we don't have to have all the fish or birds the same. We can make a swarm which is differentiated with different individuals, which nature never produced, creating kind of swarm formation, etc., etc. And I'm defending this, the kind of artificiality of this, as a design project, because on the one hand we have Freud as moving into kind of developing structures. He can optimize them through analog models as structures. There is another layer with an architecture where I want to have these organically, intricately correlated and deep and awesome kind of compositions, not because they're only because they're high performance and because they really deliver the most efficient kind of structural performance, but I'm also craving for this as a kind of articulation, as an artistic project which allows us to navigate these complex spaces. So there is a kind of articulatory project where I can use a lot of this artificial nature to create wonderfully navigable and highly organized spaces which are not necessarily about their physical performance. It's about their kind of social communication performance, if you like. And that's why the artificiality is important. Okay, this is the way parametricism stuff looks like. That's where it gets its inspiration from in terms of natural analogs. And if you want to coin it down into 3 slogans, I mean, I had 3 negative slogans. I also create 3 positive slogans. Principle of parametricism. The first one is, these are just the kind of opposites. Soft forms. And of course, we use these kind of blobs, NURB surfaces as primitives, and there's a whole kind of, each of them creates a whole kind of range of elements within a species. So we have that, but we have, and we apply this to all design aspects, not only architecture. And more importantly, these soft forms, of course, I can have embedded intelligence. There could be structural performance, there could be other aspect, environmental responsiveness, etc. So that is another aspect, and we're always craving for that, and always aim for that. But I also leave the kind of just the pure form, soft form, as a kind of articulatory, artistic project, and it's not necessarily only about the kind of hardcore performance. So soft forms, intelligent soft forms. the first positive principle. The next one is, so always start with soft forms and assume parametric elements. The next one is always differentiate. And differentiation and this whole kind of world of setting up generative components and differentiating the surface, thinking through genotypes and let them proliferate and respond to phenotypical conditions. Of course, it's extremely important, that moment of differentiation from element to element, and then creating a kind of field of continuous differentiation which you can follow and understand, and that's a kind of moment of adaptation, of course. Extremely important. Everybody knows these techniques, and everybody would. And it was important to say that so differentiation you can kind of pick up on environmental parameters, or you just simply want to accentuate and differentiate the surface because you want to allow different social events to happen along and within that surface. So it's not necessarily always has to be tied to let's say engineering type parameters. And this differentiation is intelligent as well. And this is just an example of a recent project we won in Beijing, where you just take the engineering software and you measure the light distribution over the year, and then you just allow that to drive a kind of, for instance, a Louver script, densify accordingly. These are kind of these are the point of triviality already assumed as the natural way of working. We would no longer allow ourselves to just apply a kind of generic Louver system. It will have to go through a kind of intelligent scripting process. And the epiphany for me was when I saw the kind of GCs and this population of components on the surface emerging. I said, oh wow, you don't have to just, these are not necessarily only facade panels kind of adapting to a complex geometry. This could be whole buildings as components populating the landscape, and that's the epiphanic moment, the foundation, let's say, of what I at that moment called parametric urbanism as a paradigm, and now I call parametricist urbanism, if you like. But the third and most important principle or heuristic principle of parametricism is that you would always seek out for correlations, and I think you mentioned kind of denigrated with associative modeling. This is just kind of, I think that's the heart for me. That's the kind of thing where it's at. And I'm not necessarily privileging just the emergent, the generative out of its own. I think this is kind of a source material, and what we really have to do is forge correlations, be creative, inventive about setting up correlations between everything and everything, from everything to from local to global, from layer to layer, from inside to outside, from urban to architectural. That's where the game is. And that's why we need malleable elements. That's why we need to differentiate, finally to correlate. And that, for me, the epiphanic moment was this, when I first heard the word scripting in the domain of architecture at the DRL in the 90s, where a responsive environment paradigm, where we said, okay, you can set this up, and any parameter of any object, position, shape, color, reflectivity, can be correlated with any parameter, object, aspect of any number of other elements, and it's just an infinite universe of possibility of stitching up the association. That's where it is. That's the heart. That's the core. It could also be, and the systems could be absolutely divergent. I'm interested that you have totally radically different ontologies, and you make resonances. You set up correlations. And it means that the tower doesn't hit the ground dead. It does something. There's a kind of repercussion, resonance. There's action at distance as well, but there's also this proximate aspect. Here we're correlating shape of tower with facade component, if from retail to office to residential. It's always this association. And of course, in terms of techniques of associative modeling, we're getting there as well. The ideas we have, we can design them. We don't necessarily need to be geared up so well, but to really implement it, you can see all these elements, and you see a lot of components are drawn together and recognize each other, and the element it goes through a series move, and everything follows through. This is just a kind of very, very generic setup, and I criticize there's a lot of repetition here still going on, but this is just the beginning of a kind of tower research we're doing, where it's all about the correlation of the subsystems within the structure resonating with each other. Interarticulation of multiple subsystems. That's the key. That's where we have to go, and that's why I said to Mark, move from single system to multiple system, and also please come back to architecture. Use these galleries. I mean, that's as vehicles to get resources, but come back to architecture. We need you. So this is the one of those DRL projects where it is about correlating subsystems, and then also when I see the kind of transcoding with some of the things like Casey was doing from one to the other, I want to see all the different versions of a transcoded data set having many lives to be there simultaneity, not switch from one to the other. I like to, architecture is not a single kind of system. It's so many subsystems, so many materials, so many strata coming together, and they need to be all coincided and orchestrated in the artifact, and that's where the heart of parametricism lies. So this is where, of course, you start out the tower. There's a kind of lattice structure. Of course, you differentiate along the vertical axis. In the end, you differentiate along the circumference. You give it a bit of a twist to see what happens to allow the differentiation to radiate through the structure. Then you take a kind of network script to kind of recognize the initial differentiation. And you kind of amplify. For me, the key is the kind of the amplification of an initial differentiation through a second layer, the accentuation, which makes it also more legible, transparent, and it makes sense with the kinds of structural efficiency. But as architects, we're really interested in the. Then you can set thresholds. It's not only always about kind of gradients. You can arbitrary threshold, solid void. Then you comes in the next subsystem. There's already kind of a structured. Structural shell, the floor systems, and they respond to the way the curvature applies. You pull back with the floor at that point, and you do that with more complexity. Every kind of these empty places now allows the slab to pull back. Simple rules of association. Then we come in with a structure, and it's important that these subsystems kind of come together, and the tower is the ideal vehicle for it because that's such a rigid typology. You know what the subsystems are. It's tight. It's not going everywhere, and it's a tight body you can kind of work through. So we have this diagram, and then we're saying equidistant setup of the points for the ribs. You pull them back, and then what you see is that the position of the core, the asymmetric position of the core implies that combined with the equidistant projection back of the ribs, that here you have very wide spacing where it's close, very dense spacing where it's far. So the distance of the core to its perimeter drives the density, and you have a kind of local recognition. When you, in a zone of dense ribs, you know that you're far away from the perimeter at the point. You also make the rib deeper. Every aspect kind of has a repercussion. Then there's a lot of local to global inferences, and these correlations you also feel there is something going on. Thing means it's not just clobbered together. Things are not indifferent. They all recognize each other, respond to each other, and that creates this awesome beauty where you want to, and we have this. I think in terms of aesthetic sensibilities, a lot of this culturally kind of formed, but there's also something very deep where you're never curious about a spilled garbage can, because there is no order organization. You can kick it and nothing matters, nothing makes a difference. But here there's this kind of awesome recognition that everything is in its place, everything works together, is correlated, interrelated, and that's a kind of very, very powerful, I think, also aesthetic paradigm. And you can navigate it. You know everything makes sense. You can follow the correlations through and know where you want to be and where kind of events might settle. Then you can, this is just details of the kind of solid void is then kind of ameliorated again with another component placed on top. And then when you kind of come in, you get, and this is just a student project, you get a sense of things kind of make sense, come together. There's an orchestration of radically different ontologies and systems, and that's what I insist on. But they kind of, you feel there's a kind of radiating cross-orchestration, which is beauty. So just to summarize, the principles of parametricism. And it's important that these are, okay, the negative principle, no rigid forms, no simple repetition, no collage of isolated, unrelated elements, positively all forms soft and intelligently soft, so that deformation becomes information, all systems differentiated and all systems correlated. Now, these are not just kind of, they're dogmas taboos and dogmas because we're not going to do anything else. We know that. But at the same time, there are tools of criticism and project development, project enhancement. When you teach, you can always identify there are still rigid forms here. You can work on these and make them soft. There is still elements of repetition. Overcome this. You still haven't, and there's more to be differentiated. There's more to correlate. It's an infinite, endless job which can only boost and develop the project further. Every new project, you can kind of up the game, and that's the way I teach. You just so that easy. The lines of progress are plotted out. You have always intelligent design work to do. Of course, coming up with the ideas of which kind of function I should script, what I can correlate with what and how, and how. That's where the creativity is. Right? You can always send the student back and correlate these. It's absolutely fail-safe, and it's important. And when he comes back with the correlation, it is definitely enhancing the project. So these are the operational definition of parametricism. And to somehow, it's inevitable. We know it's exactly what we're doing. And why are we doing this? What is the advantage? Of course, the intensity of relations which are created. Internal integration within the building and external adaptation. As if we build no longer like the modernists, we no longer build this tower there and plunk it there. Of course, we have to seek out adaptations, affiliations, hopefully multiple affiliations all around, and that's the kind of a performance game. That's the kind of race, and it's very clear that what the criticisms and what the ambitions of the project will be in terms of, for instance, contextualism. And this is and the power of that we are able, and no deconstructors, postmodernists, modernists, neoclassicists can take, and that's why we win competitions, can take a kind of existing fabric, pick it all up, affiliate to it, let it participate, and radically deliver new, larger sites, bigger buildings, open places, etc. This is just a simple diagram. And in terms of internal integration, I reuse this image. Functional heuristics. There is something, and I have to bring it in. It's the first time I kind of talk about this. It's not in the article. Is also to be looked at. We have a different way of conceiving functions. Negatively, we're avoiding now typological reduction to generic or essentializing functional designations. We don't have these kind of rigid stereotypes and say this is the living room or this is the lecture theater, which is a single function, a single relatedness encapsulated. That's no longer what we do. Positively, we want to think about, if you get a brief about variable social scenarios, calibrated by multiple event parameters, etc. We have a different conception of what it is, actor, artifact networks, etc. So I don't have time to go into detail with it, but there's definitely a different way of functional heuristics, a different way of working up the brief and setting out the issues when we approach this as parametricist architects. Okay, now, the techniques are extremely important. Everybody here has to recognize, I think I disagree with Marcus saying that you should go to the biology department. No, you have to learn and acquire. You have to bring yourself up to the level of your discipline and participate. So the techniques are extremely important, and you have to crack them, learn them, expand them, and otherwise you cannot participate. That's a precondition now, but it's not all. There is a distinction between parametricism and parametrics, and that's the image I like to use. It's been laudated as the first project which used, and yes, it's true, every node is different, every element is different in that form, but architecturally it wants to deny this differentiation of the surface, that the surface has a different orientation, a different curvature, So here it's a parametric techniques in the service of neutralizing difference, right? So there's inconspicuous neutralization of differences. That's what Foster's here up to. And in the end, architect, on the terms of values, he wants to solve that complex geometry like that. He is still Miesian. And I love this. That's what you want to do. You want to, and that's the difference. That's the kind of Kunstwollen, but it also makes much more sense in contemporary society. You want to have the conspicuous amplification of differences. You have the surface definition, you celebrate it, and I love this because it has these kind of the parallel ribs, it has the regular grid, and then it becomes kind of dense and intricate, and it modulates between all these. And you can imagine that different event scenarios will settle, that it's got much more richer and variegated space, rather than that big kind of neutralizing kind of envelope. So that's what we're after, and that's the difference between parametrics and parametricism. So the emphasis is on differentiation, deviation, amplification, rather than neutralizing compensation. So, and there's also this whole thing. I think we have to recognize that architecture is different from engineering. Somebody mentioned, interestingly, you had that. I think Mark's idea was quite nice about the kind of problem-solving attitude and the kind of problem-formulating, ambition-generating attitude, and that's the difference. And I'm all to say explorative design research. Of course, we also need to solve problems, and we use engineers for that or ourselves. And a lot of the coding in the end might be kind of specialist engineers brought in, or versus problem solving, implementation. There is quite a bit of difference between tectonic design and facade engineering, which means tectonic design, it's important appearances, the legibility, the facade articulation at this point resonates with the totality of facades in that whole zone. So it's not a technical problem. And you harness technological efficiencies and you heighten them to become articulatory means. And that's the difference between architecture and engineering. And we have to emphasize these disciplines are different autopoietic systems of communications, which are in fact incommensurable. And avant-garde designs, I mean, and that's also hits into this. A lot of what we're doing is still in the stage of hypotheses. You can't you're not yet competing benchmark kind of level of competition. We can't stand it yet. Well, there are some projects I would say we can. And there are manifestos. They don't have to hyper-perform in their promises of a higher performance. They're not necessarily perform better where they're employed. Like the Riedfeld house of Schröder house from Riedfeld was not the best single-family house. It was a manifesto of a new kind of spatial sensibility. And that has to be recognized. And one more time in terms of this, yes, we're saying it solves everything through scripting, even if you don't have to. It's not about the pragmatics of getting things done. It's about forcing the discipline through that track. So the a priori of techniques in the architectural research is not about the best way of doing it. It is maybe initially the most difficult things to do it, but you have to do it this way because there's a learning curve there to be garnered. But styles and design media have always been in an interesting dialectic. And I'm saying the Renaissance, in fact, interestingly, although I think Gothic produced some architecture, the discipline of architecture emerges in the Renaissance because it's the kind of conscious reflection and criticism with theoretical texts and reinvention of architecture, and it comes together with a new medium of speculation perspective. I think the Baroque is a kind of dialectic movement with projective geometry, modernism, axonometry, where you suddenly can just roll out these infinite arrays of space. But I mean, you can see this is kind of harmless. This is really monumental in terms of the shift, right? So we have to expect monumental changes. And this is just another thing. I mean, what struck me, it's the utilization of digital design universe to design a world with its own creative laws, logic, and association. This is the kind of recreating quasi-laws of nature. Creation of new species, new complex order with new beauty. I mean, that's the world. I mean, it's just staggering. And in terms of grasping that, the freedom, the creative freedom which there is. And that's why it doesn't matter. It's so rich and infinite that you can give that corset of the taboos and dogmas, because within there's so much richness and there's so much, and you don't need to kind of be eclectic, and it's not kind of totalitarian. It is within itself. It's actually the first kind of style who has an enormous variegation within itself while you have to toe the line, the taboos and dogmas stand. Now, in terms of history of parametricism, is at the same time, of course, the history of architecture and the history even of humanity, the world civilization, if you like. It's embedded, of course. And to step back, I mean, and give a kind of deeper long-term perspective of the role of architecture in, I would say, in the emergence of humanity as a new kind of species in this world is critical and crucial. There is no way, I mean, that society becomes together with architecture. I mean, that's for me a given. I mean, social order requires spatial order. Architecture provides a long-term social memory as a necessary substrate of evolution. I think there's no way that, let's say, the kind of flock of apes becomes human through, it needs the kind of new evolutionary substrates, the permanence of settlement structures. It needs to also artificially order itself through kind of manipulating its physiognomy and so on. So there's a whole thing there about, and I'm just going through, but very quickly, kind of different stages of civilization and the kind of architectures which sponsor and sustain these kind of the civilizations, and that with each kind of new level system comes a kind of totally new architecture, which with a new phenomenology. So you have these kind of early villages, and you have the crystallization of cities in an agricultural landscape. It's a huge jump, of course, in terms of feudalism, and there are certain organs which are kind of created and accrued, and of course these at this point these kind of structures kind of grow slowly through trial and error in an unconscious kind of traditional process, but there's always the same kind of organs. These are the moments of the trade and exchange and the crystallization of a specialized handicraft in a kind of agricultural society. And these, if you look at the map of Europe during the Middle Ages, you have kind of thousands of dots of these smaller cities, equidistant, more or less in the landscape, crystalling out like little kind of bacteria hubs, if you like. There's a kind of near naturalness about this process, and all cities, whether it was from the Paris to the smallest one at the beginning, they were all the same size. They're always the marketplace, the handicraft streets, and the church and the wall around it. That was the organs, I mean, which developed. And then comes this kind of big bang of the Renaissance, where what has been growing, and let's say that the round form of the city is just the simple law of efficiency of circumference and so on. It's a nearly quasi-trial-error material process, animal-like nearly of the early architectures, and then you have the kind of big bang of architecture as a conscious discipline which draws these things out, the separation of drawing from building. And then, of course, the initial ideal cities are just representations of the medieval town. And then it kind of, history accelerates drastically and fast. Perspective comes out and you can speculate. And this is kind of settling in a series of ideal Renaissance cities. And then comes the moment of the Baroque, where, 200 years later, where this kind of order, consciously planned and structured order of the city, which was confined within the city and the rest was kind of terra incognita, amorphous hinterland, this order of the city is now kind of thrust outwards, cut out, and the landscape and nation state. There's roads built, canals cut. That's the moment of Louis XIV, the national economy, etc. The moment of the Baroque city plan. And then I'm just jumping, just to give a few hints. And there's interesting aspects about Baroque architecture being able to, with its devices of convex, concave, asymmetry in the detail, creating a more stronger symmetry in the overall compared to the more additive composition of the Renaissance. The Baroque architecture can grasp and integrate larger structures into integrative whole than the Renaissance. And then you have, I'm just jumping ahead, the kind of mechanical repetition of modernism and industrial society. And what it generates is two things. It generates a kind of the endless repetition on the one hand of products, of elements, and it creates a kind of complex organization which works through separating out radically different. You see, these are so different from here, each of them different, but within total repetition. And you can show that in a lot of them. It's something new, but within repetition. So it's a kind of zoning, separating out, keeping the relationships minimal. Every institutional building is like this, the different wings. The Bauhaus, look at it. Each segment separated out for special function, the freedom to have different floor height, depths, and so on, and then the minimal connection. So there's kind of separation and repetition as a kind of organizational paradigm of modernism. But you find the same. I can do the same kind of principles I've done for parametricism, for modernism, and it rips through. It just changes the face of this globe within in a few decades, and that's such a successful reproduction paradigm, and modern architecture was the aligned answer to that. And it got into crisis in the 70s. Doesn't mean that this was a mistake at the time. This delivered a new level of material plenty and a new level of freedom. And the whole of the architectural of the international style is kind of can be read as a kind of high performance answer to a Fordist reproduction paradigm. And of course, that at a certain moment that goes into crisis, and there's a kind of switch, and a new kind of way to go. There's the moment of crisis shows up in kind of ironic dystopian visions, then shows up in kind of back to history and kind of confusion. Kind of wild experimentation, and then a kind of new kind of ordering principles. And early on with Zaha, also kind of vision that whatever we're working on would kind of transform again the face of the planet. And then we are kind of finally arriving at winning with these principles large projects. So, and also just a reminder of that early on I realized that this work is powerful and it means something. There's an enormous, interestingly, alignment of the concepts and desires of parametricism at the time called folding, which was so much aligned with corporate organization principles, in a sense partaking in a kind of global paradigm shift, which also relates to the sciences, to political structures, etc. Anyway, these are some of these early projects of, and it's important to mention that these were an idea to tackle corporate organization of kind of three-dimensional Bürolandschafts, high-performance spaces by definition, and we were able to, with the BMW plan, to bring that into reality, to convince BMW that their kind of central administration building should not be another of these blocks on the side, but should sit in the right and in the heart of it. You kind of funnel all communications, you mix functions, and you create a kind of intricate kind of field space, open space, and with a high, strong formal a priori, similar to Rome project, this kind of everything kind of subjected and brought under the spell of the kind of line geometries flying through. But in the end, a kind of thing which functions and works and performs on a high level better than a modernist solution would have been. So here we're arriving at gaining confidence and demonstrating the capacity of this new way of working. And I can extrapolate this again in terms of the space, in terms of the sensibilities, to look at the interior, the kind of deep layering, the simultaneity of participation, at the same time a kind of rich differentiation of a scene. These are the kind of things which I think sustain contemporary society, network society. Just to go through it very quickly in a kind of run-through. So we have this kind of medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, modernism, postmodernism, deconstructivism. But each of them only a decade, which is nothing. And we already kind of 15 years in with, parametricism. So that's my kind of theory of where we are and what we're doing. And the idea of epochal styles versus transitional styles and subsidiary styles. Subsidiary, for instance, in modernism, you had the white modernism, then came brutalism, then came kind of high-tech. They're kind of styles, but they're subsidiary. They're under the paradigm of modernism. And we're talking about an epochal new style, which will have many, many subsidiary styles. It's also, I think, the first style which might have even fashions within it. It's like the international style, but much more. It's truly global. There can no longer be any national or regional architectures, I believe. But it has the inherent capacity of local adaptation, which modernism didn't have to the same extent. So there's a number of things one can kind of think through, and it's no fashion itself, but within itself it has fashion. That has to be also clear, that this is an unbelievable profundity. And what it does is it organizes and articulates the social complexity of post-Fordist network society. But this post-Fordist network society is happening. It's kind of happening through socioeconomic restructuring and economic dynamics. It's happening through political dynamics. We just face with this and deal with it and translate that. We are not substituting ourselves for the politics which is coming on. And I'm therefore not so keen on those who kind of try to substitute architecture of politics, like Ronald Martin, these kind of critical kind of... we have to draw the conclusions and deliver the architecture for these ongoings. And there's a lot of progressive elements in these transformations. So now, I'm taking too much time, but I'm going to fly through, and that's quite important, through the Zaha Hadid architects' contributions to this. These were maybe still kind of deconstructivist, translating into parametricism, fully kind of malleable and intricate structure of Wolfsburg. It's so rich and variegated. The repertoire, everything is parametricist, everything is kind of malleable and differentiated, but we have different conceptual morphologies, different ways of classifying and ordering the work according to these. So it's a very, very rich and infinitely rich world compared to modernism. Of course, lots of blobs, and in all these domains, we create these kind of families of projects. Fields, extremely important in terms of the urbanism, continuously differentiating fields, and different examples, and the interarticulation also of urbanism and architecture is very important, physical planning, and the ability to deliver both at the same time. Urbanism, urban design, architecture, even interiors and details in one kind of unified, correlated, resonating process. So there's a slogan of total fluidity on all scales. Urbanism is where it all comes together, but it's important to recognize that we're doing all scales and all programs now, like modernism. Modernism, for the first time, universalized architecture. Before that, architecture was the preserve of institutional buildings, churches, palaces, particular buildings, and then it was still the kind of unthought vernacular. Modernism, for the first time, claims universal relevancy and competency. And that is not only for urbanism, architecture, it's also for interior design, for product design, for all design. It's one unified discourse, and I'm claiming the same authority. So what we're doing here will affect everything everywhere. There's a kind of total universal claim and exclusive competency of the discourse of architecture for the totality of all artifactual production in this world. And that starts with urbanism, when it's, if this discourse is hegemonic here, it will ripple and rip through everything and transform everything. Like modernism. Look at the Bauhaus, look at the furniture, the products, everything was transformed in its image. And so we're doing large urban projects, we're doing institutional clusters, we're doing sports projects. We're doing museums, of course, and most of them are cultural buildings, special public buildings, because that's where there's a bit more space for manifestos, where the kind of performance criteria are a little bit more loose. Performing arts in Guangzhou, and just click through that stuff. And everywhere the principles assume a kind of single surface modulating, bringing together seating, lighting gantries, etc. And the look at nature sometimes kind of more inspired by kind of formal formations. A lot of these kind of inspirations and transformations, but a lot of these are competition wins and so on, as I said, for cultural buildings, kind of the project in Amman, for instance, for National Theatre. And everywhere there's a kind of a desire for simultaneity of space unfolding below, above, all around, integrating with the landscape, with the urban, having kind of thinking through meaningful relationships between exterior and interior. A new Guggenheim Museum, a new cultural center which combines museum, library, and conference center, and which generates a whole kind of urbanism around this, and the landscape around this, and it's on site as well. And importance, the interior, the integration of exterior and interior, the kind of connections and differentiation, then the kind of flow from one space to another. This is first one was a museum, then we're moving to the library, moving to the conferencing area. Tripoli, actually it's a People's Congress, new potential museum here in America. A lot of these institutional cultural buildings as hubs of communication, and there's always a kind of, they're all different, they're all unique, they embed in a context, they're kind of multifaceted. A recent one in Casablanca, there's an interest in penetrating exterior and interior, bleeding out to structure public space around it. National Library of Astana, again, interior is very important. Beethoven Festival Hall, hotel and conferencing, and you see there's a whole kind of repertoire. And then office buildings, the next category, we're moving to corporate headquarters and an office building. And again, I don't want to go through institutional buildings, law courts, more office buildings, residential towers, mixed use, office, hotel, apartment, towers as a typology, and the discourse is about differentiating along the vertical axis and feeding and embedding in various ways into kind of ground surface and context, opening up in various ways. So there's kind of topics. First tower built, Abu Dhabi, institutional buildings in France, a new one in China was just mentioned, colony of also office space, kind of retail or commercial complex, kind of is a typical one, the kind of the new primitive of the blob, kind of metaballing, making connections, creating indoor and outdoor spaces as a kind of new answer to create kind of a series of office blocks with retail on the ground, and a kind of deep, multi-layered space of using the bridges to create a kind of three-dimensional space of participation. These are a big project in the center of Beijing. New business park in Cairo, with a kind of retail landscape in the middle, and kind of there's kind of 18 double towers, all different but all correlated, creating spatial scenarios. Expo City Cairo. These are real projects which are happening and ongoing. Another retail project in Italy. Airport, competition loss, bridges, and then the bridge which has differential spans and picks up and is able to handle those. Villas on site as well. Just thought I'd throw some villas in because I'm in California here is a villa in Russia, there's a villa in Dubrovnik. But then also it's important to go down in scale, pavilions, event spaces, event structures, exhibition spaces, hotel rooms, kitchens, furniture, and always trying to kind of create a field, create a spatial, make the furniture kind of space-making substance, transient, kitchens. But then we've drawn into, whether it's lighting fixtures, of course, elements, handbags, display things, shelving systems. It's endless. It's a kind of a whole world. You all can do it. We field conditions out of aggregating elements. Club in London, reception desk, and a bar, which is a complex thing with many things kind of embedded in organizing multi-event in a single kind of blob structure. I mean, multi-systems, not just one kind of material shape, with a soft, hard, the pleats of the fabric correlating and resonating with the pleats of the fiberglass. Fireplaces, you name it. I mean, of course, always as a parametric family, rather than one product tailored, you can just lighting fixtures, stools, a new desk, shoes. I just wanted to come to this point. I mean, parametrism is truly universal. Sorry, it took a while. Should I finish here? I mean, I haven't finished, but maybe we should. Well, I mean, it's just part two. Which one? Oh, the 5 agendas. Okay, well. No, I mean, this was another one where I said, let's say, 3 projects, and I was clicking through, where I would say we have delivered something which is kind of competing high performance, like in the city, each station different, each adapted, each recognizable. Modernism would just have the same station repeated. So there's kind of a sense of a genotype adapting to different conditions, absorbing different conditions, and it's a very successful project where we say no other style can do that, no other style can compete with that and deliver a kind of more satisfying solution to this particular project. And there are a few other build examples which have been successful. And in particular, for instance, the bridge, which becomes an exhibition space, it recognizes it can set on it the landscape, it proliferates it. It ramifies its spaces. It's a kind of, let's say, very satisfying, complete, and mature result, I would say, where again, it's a competition and well done. So it's, let's say, fully performing parametricism, fully winning out and arriving parametricism, where I wanted to say it is real, it is happening. And the agendas were, and maybe I'm not sure we get into it. First one was to say the emphasis on parametric, what I call accentuation, where like I said before, you accentuate differences, you amplify, you use one kind of layer to reveal and make transparent hidden layers. The second one, you do that through multi-systems correlation. There is this whole research we had for 3 years at the DRL, parametric responsiveness, where, I mean, it was the most immediate. The initial tool set came from the illumination industry, and there's so many mobile elements in architecture, all the doors, the windows, the roller blinds, the light switching on and off, sliding doors, partitioning, furniture roaming around. And I say, take all this stuff, which is now kind of inert, and make that a kind of medium of responsiveness, give these elements sensors and let them respond. So there's this aspect. And then there's a whole, and I will not go through it, idea of parametric figuration where I'm saying move away, not only dealing with object parameters, that the kind of you correlate the geometry according to other geometry, to other elements, but think about ambient parameters and correlate those, sort of light conditions, reflectivity, other ambient values, and subject parameters. Think about the human body's subject positions, and you can do it in a computer with cameras and camera moves, and make that a key parameter, and set up your scenes gestalt sensitive so that they respond and transform and transmute as the camera moves around. That is kind of important, because one thing is important in architecture, that there is no nowhere in the world, all the orders and distinctions and whether you say there is not enough order, there's more order, or how we understand and navigate the world is, of course, depending on our kind of conceptual apparatus and our conception, perception, and comprehension. And particularly in architecture, what I call the decomposition of the scene. What are the elements you distinguish, whether it is from one room to another, one element, what kind of belongs together and what is set apart and what you pay attention to, is so always already much more ambiguous than in the real world, in the world of objects and artifacts. I know that this pen is a pen and it can move it against its background, and it has two parts and they come together. It's clearly that this is one entity and this is another, because I can move them around. In architecture, everything is fixed and bolted together and rooted. It's very difficult. There's no clear criterion what is one object versus another, whereas one zone starting in another. So there's a lot of play here for continuous reinterpretation. So I'm looking at utilizing this to create a kind of built-in reflection on perception and think about, that you set up your designs with a kind of multiply decomposable scenes where the camera movement and ambient conditions radically transform and reconfigure the space, and you work with that. That is parametric configuration, and the last one is parametricist urbanism, a kind of agenda which is put on the agenda here, but which I think I had also at DRL for 3 years kind of pushed. And these are the kind of 5 domains where I think 5 frontiers of parametric work. But I think I'll stop here.